took this opportunity to rethink some of their values, what they think about gender roles, for example. That was a very important issue for themselves and for their children. So it was not always straightforward how they would position themselves, but it was something that they experienced that they need to think about. Then a big wish for most was they want to participate in the workforce, so they want to work, but there were a number of challenges, and I go to that in more detail with some statistics a little bit later. There was building new structures of networks, migrant networks, even directly Syrians connecting to themselves. So we had like Syrians in Germany or in Europe establishing newspapers and some kind of big Facebook groups where there were a lot of discussions going on, and these networks still exist today. Very interesting for me was also the perspective of many women who came to Germany in so there were mostly, I think 60% or so were men, but there were also 40% women among the Syrians, and they often experienced this as a form of liberation, especially when they would come with their families. And we had 3 or 4 cases where they were in divorce of their abusive husbands, which they couldn't do in the previous settings. So that was some were very religious, some were not so religious, so it was across the religious board. So that was something that they experienced. And then what is very important to, I think, to stress, there are not these Syrians in Germany. There are a lot of differences in ethnicities, in even in religion, and how they see the world. So they're all individuals, but about 30% of the Syrians in Germany are Kurds, and who were heavily discriminated against in Syria. And that had also consequence then how they would see the German society and the other Syrians, and so on. A lot of implications, which makes it maybe complicated even also to talk about these Syrians, right? And they're not one group. So they also have like negative experiences. So a huge problem was that they it was easier for the Syrians than for example, people coming from Afghanistan to get the first step of the asylum process, that they could stay. They got a permission to stay for 2 or sometimes 3 years. That was relatively easy, but they didn't know what was after that. Could they stay, or would they have to leave? And so a lot of people are in this status that they don't know how long they can stay. If that is a permanent situation now, that way they can build their lives in that country, or do they have to always think about, okay, maybe I have to go back or somewhere else, and so. And also the housing market was already tight. Now it's even tighter in Germany, but and especially, of course, for refugees who get subsidies from the government, but usually they get housing in like mass accommodations, and it's difficult to get out of that, even if you get funding from the government, to find somebody who wants to rent out to you, right? So that was somewhere frustrated with this experience living in this mass accommodation, which has moved on now in the last years, that most people got into like private accommodations. Now, in the work market, that was also very difficult, still is very difficult for most to get into that. Then of course, many have a lot of traumata, from their experiences back in Syria, and again, some were fleeing from the Syrian government, some were fleeing from ISIS, and these are not the same people, and often also in the refugees accommodations, there were like groups in one accommodation who fought against each other in Syria in a way. So it's a complicated situation. What was difficult for the German administrators who were then running these facilities even to know what was going on. Then they experienced also racism from the German population. They also experienced some support, but yeah, racism was also there. Something that we saw in the thinking of many of the Syrians that we talked to was a conspiratorial way of thinking, which was which showed up in an anti-Jewish stereotypes, but also, perhaps more importantly, to themselves. For example, many had the idea that it would be good and effective to look for a Jewish lawyer to get the asylum process done, which is, of course, a waste of time. First of all, there are not so many Jewish lawyers in Germany, but also they're not necessarily better than non-Jewish lawyers. And so this is just one example to say, okay, this kind of logic, also the logic why they are there. Some had this global conspiracy ideas that it was somehow orchestrated, that Germany would have orchestrated that now Syrians find themselves in Germany because they need them for the workforce or something. It does also not help them. Right? So a lot of these things that was, but again, this is not throughout the board, some of them. Okay, so now I have 10 minutes left or so?
You have about 5.5 minutes.
5.5, very good, okay. So, maybe, okay. The refugee crisis, it's sometimes I put it in quotation mark. So what happened in the summer 2015? And I think that we could learn something from that. So, you might remember some of these images. They were very strong images. So basically it was clear to German population, but across the world, that there were many people fleeing from Syria, but also from other countries, who really needed help, and also who took a lot of risks to get to Europe. Many people died on the trip, and you see this image here. You probably remember that. So children were then, that is from Turkey. Well, that image is not from Turkey, that's from Frankfurt, but it's a mural in remembrance of this boy who was found on the shores of Turkey, who died in the transfer. So that was a very powerful image, and you see that also in the fact that was then painted as a mural in Germany. Then you had people who were kind of smuggled in to Germany, and you had these trucks this one truck was then found after a few days, I think, standing in the sun, and dead people were found there, and it was a horrific story. So these kind of images were there, that people really felt this is not right, something has to be done about this. Then you saw also, many people were going through Hungary. Hungary said, we don't want refugees here, and at some point refugees started walking. Is there an image here? I don't have it here, I think. So the next slide. Started walking on the Autobahn towards Austria, and that was the moment. So you might know what the actual policy is of the European Union, saying, well, those who want to enter Europe, they first have to apply asylum where they enter first in the European Union. So that was the decision when Merkel said, okay, we do not close the borders to these people. And my point here is, she did not have much of a choice, because the alternative would be to ensure that nobody passed the border with soldiers. That would have been disastrous as an image for Germany. So she did not have much choice. It was not so much ethical things. So again, it was more of the policy of the day, what actually people can then do, and what politicians, what kind of leeway they have. Okay, so that was then when Merkel also put out the slogan, "Wir schaffen es, we will do it, we can manage it." And there was a lot of support in the German population, but there was also a lot of objection to it. So I have 1 more minute or so.
4 with an extra bonus too, so 4.
4, very good. So there was some people were attacking also migrants directly in the mass accommodations, for example. They were putting fire. Sometimes, luckily, mostly before refugees arrived there, just firebombing the still empty building. But in some cases also when there were people already in there. There was these mass demonstrations, regular mass demonstrations against accepting refugees, and you probably all are familiar with this extreme right-wing party, the AfD, Alternative for Germany. That was founded earlier, but it was going down in the elections. But I don't know, thanks to these images, they could mobilize enough people in the electorate to vote for them and to mobilize. That's one of the main themes. One of the 2 most important themes is go against immigration. The other is history, German history. Okay, so that is something that of course has consequences until today. That there is now a far-right party that is uniting people from the far right that was not there before. Of course, all this ended then with a deal with Turkey, that the German government got into a deal with Turkey saying, well, look, you take, we give you enough money that you make sure that it's not so easy to cross your borders into the for people to cross the border from Turkey to Greece, and that you take back, when somebody applies asylum, the same amount of people than to Turkey, which actually then was a mechanism that worked well, and we had after that very few. It's a bit complicated, but we have it worked. That most people were not able then, at least not in the numbers as before, to cross these borders. Okay, so maybe just roughly, so the statistics, now we are about 200,000 refugees per year coming to Germany last year. Most of them still, not most of them, but 30% or so is still Syrians. So it's still a big number. These numbers do not include people from Ukraine. They are separate. They're not dealt with as in this asylum process. They're granted immediately the status to be able to stay. All refugees in Germany get, when they are accepted as refugees, they have the same rights to subsidies as Germans. There was some legal debates around that, but they do have that. And together with I looked into the numbers. I can show you if you want that then afterwards. Maybe I go through that quickly now. So all this, of course, is substantial in money that Germany has spent on this. So I thought that it was less, but when you look actually at the numbers, it's about 6 to 7% of the federal budget that has been spent for accommodations, language courses, and so on, to in a way help refugees. Of course, most of this money then stays in Germany, right? These companies that provide housing, these are German companies, and the teachers who work in giving language integration classes, they pay taxes in Germany, so it's, you can look at it many ways, but it's not straightforward that this is not negligible, the amount of efforts that people, if you have like big numbers of people taken in, it's substantial. Of course, Germany has done it. It has not damaged the economy, but it's substantial. I want to close there because I'm running out of time. Thank you.